Rival Palestinian factions Hamas and Fatah have signed a declaration agreeing to form an interim national reconciliation government for the occupied West Bank and Gaza after the war with Israel in a meeting brokered by China. Representatives from the groups, along with 12 other Palestinian factions, pledged to work for unity following 3 days of talks in Beijing. As the latest of several reconciliation deals, Hamas and Fatah have agreed on their long fractured relationship, none of which have yet led to the end of the schism. Israel has also ruled out a role for Hamas or Fatah in governing Gaza after the end of hostilities. The deep split began in 2007 when Hamas became the sole ruler in Gaza after violently rejecting Fatah from the territory. This came after Palestinian President and Fatah leader Mahmoud Abbas dissolved the Hamas-led unity government formed when Hamas won national elections the year before. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been assuring families of hostages held in Gaza that a deal that would secure their loved ones' release could be near. He told the families in Washington the conditions are ripening. Is in the U.S. Capitol to meet U.S. President Joe Biden later this week after making an address to Congress. Efforts to reach a Gaza ceasefire deal outlined by President Biden in May and mediated by Egypt and Qatar have gained momentum over the past month. On Friday, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said negotiators were driving toward the goal line. Ruby Chen, father of dual U.S.-Israeli citizen Itai Chen, a soldier whose body is being held in Gaza, was one of the family members who met with Netanyahu. Chen said he hoped Biden, who withdrew his bid for re-election and endorsed Kamala Harris, would apply more pressure on Netanyahu to secure the deal. Meanwhile, an Israeli raid on gunmen in the occupied West Bank has killed over 5 Palestinians, including 2 militant commanders and a woman. The Israeli raid took place in the city of Tulkarm, where fighting in the streets erupted with Palestinian militants. 2 militants, one from the Islamist group Hamas and one a member of rival faction Fatah, were killed, according to Palestinian sources, as well as a woman, according to the health ministry. An Israeli military spokesperson said an airstrike hit armed militants operating in the area and that exchanges of fire were ongoing. Violence in the West Bank among territories where Palestinians seek statehood had been on the rise before the outbreak of the war between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip, with deadly Israeli raids and Palestinian street attacks. I want to bring in the VOA's Linda Gradstein. Linda joins us from Jerusalem. Great to see you, as always. Let's begin with this attack now in the occupied West Bank, as well as others that we've seen in recent days, especially in Khan Yunis. The narrative going around, Linda, is that Israeli airstrikes have been targeting and bombarding the place while not giving people a chance to evacuate, because they have been calling for people to evacuate those areas. What's the real story here?
You're talking about Gaza, where Israel has been, there have been fighting now for more than 9 months. Yeah. And Israel has used, drone strikes. In fact, last week, there was a strike that killed a senior Hamas commander and may have killed the number 2 person in Hamas, Mohammed Deif. Israeli officials believe he was killed. The problem is that it's such a densely populated area, and Israel has asked people to move out from certain areas, including the parts of the Mawasi, which was supposed to be the safe area that people were to flee to. And Israel says that militants are hiding among the population. So they have asked people to leave. The problem is there's not really any place for them to go. Many of the people who were in this area have already been displaced 2, 3, or 4 times, and they really don't have any place left to go. There is just a sense the death toll in Gaza, and this is according to the Hamas-run health ministry, has passed 39,000 since the war began on October 7th when Hamas invaded Israel. Of that 39,000, Israel says at least 14,000 are Hamas militants. The health ministry does not distinguish between militants and civilians, but in any case, the population in Gaza is paying just a terrible price for this.
Now, the death toll is rising, no doubt. So have the attacks. They've also increased in Gaza. Has the Prime Minister or any member of his cabinet addressed this? Or are they carrying out a plan to completely wipe out Hamas militants, which analysts have said may be almost impossible?
Well, one of the things that's interesting is that the heads of all of the security services have said that Israel could safely accept at least the first stage of this ceasefire deal. And that there is more and more of a sense that this idea of wiping out Hamas is just not going to be possible. And that Israel has to look for other partners besides Hamas to run Gaza after the war ends. But I think there is a growing sense on both sides that the war is not achieving anything anymore. The destruction of Gaza is complete. Hamas has suffered some very serious losses. Now, the Prime Minister Netanyahu says that it's because of the Israeli military pressure that Hamas is willing to make a deal. Hamas says, it's not because of the military pressure. But in any case, there does seem to be a sense that the conditions may be ripe for a new ceasefire. And certainly for the families of the hostages who you spoke about earlier, one of whom, is a friend of mine, John Poland and Rachel Goldberg Poland. Their son Hirsch is the age of my son and has been held in captivity for 9 months. And I think that the Israeli public, there is a recent poll found that 3/4 support a ceasefire in exchange for a hostage deal.
Speaking of the hostage deal, the Prime Minister is discussing that while he's in the United States. He's also showing families that there is a deal on the table. Negotiations are in the works. What more can you tell us about these negotiations that are supposedly ongoing between Israel and Hamas at this time?
Well, they're indirect negotiations. Israel's not negotiating directly with Hamas because Israel doesn't recognize Hamas and won't negotiate with the terrorist organization. So the negotiations are being brokered by the United States, by Qatar, and by Egypt. Israel is sending a delegation back to Qatar on Thursday. However, there are some press reports that Netanyahu has added conditions to the original plan, which has been endorsed by President Biden and which he says is originally an Israeli plan. And one of those conditions might be an Israeli presence on what's called the Philadelphia route. It's the border between Gaza and Egypt. And Israel says that it needs to stay there in order to stop smuggling of weapons and drugs and other things from Egypt into Gaza. And that was one of the areas that actually Israel left in 2005 when it pulled out of Gaza. Now, Hamas is likely to say that that is not an acceptable condition, and the negotiations could fall apart. We've been very close to a deal at least 3 or 4 times in the past couple of months. And so there is a concern among the hostage families and among others who support a deal that if Israel imposes new conditions, that could cause the deal to sort of fall apart.
Well, away from the war in Gaza, Linda, one of the, I think one of the top things on Prime Minister Netanyahu's agenda is meeting with U.S. President Joe Biden, who we understand is down with COVID. And then, following his announcement on Sunday that he is withdrawing from the presidential race, has he been able to see or meet with the president? Have they had any sort of talks, and what are the outcome of those talks?
Well, Netanyahu, this is his first time in meeting the president in 4 years, and I'm sure he's quite distressed by the timing of the events. And it seems that, everybody in the United States is dealing with, who's going to be the Democratic nominee and how is this all going to work. So he's kind of got bad timing, and people are not all that interested in what's happening in Israel. He will address the joint session of Congress. The Vice President Kamala Harris has said that she will not be at that session, which is causing some, raised eyebrows in Israel. At the same time, I think it's important to say, for the sake of, nonpartisanship, that the vice presidential nominee on the Republican side, J.D. Vance, will also not be attending that session. However, that the session is coming at the invitation of the Republicans, and some of the progressive Democrats have said that they are either going to walk out or not attend. There are efforts to arrange a meeting with Kamala Harris. As far as I know, that has not been completely set up. Netanyahu is expected to meet President Joe Biden on Thursday, but as you said, he does have COVID, and assuming that he is, well enough to have a meeting. But there's so much turmoil in the American political system that I think it's kind of bad timing for Israel. But I think Netanyahu wants to show that he, still has a lot of ties to the United States. He's a good orator. He said he will remind the American public of the danger that Hamas poses, and he also wants to reassure the American public that support for Israel is a partisan issue, not a Republican, that support for Israel is a nonpartisan issue, not Republican or Democratic.
Well, Linda, we'll wait and see. Guess we'll know the outcome of Prime Minister Netanyahu's visit to the United States in just a few hours and the developments surrounding that. Thanks again for bringing us up to speed.
Thank you.